Easter is beyond the Bible, it's beyond Christianity, it's beyond dogma, it's beyond the entire, it's beyond the church, it's beyond any spiritual tradition, it's beyond anything. It is pointing to a deep aspect of being human. It's nothing to do with the church, really. It's nothing even to do with Jesus Christ. This is a Deep Psychology podcast. I'm your host, Ross Edwards, writer, meditation teacher, founder of deep-psychology.com, and avid lover of all things psychological. In listening to this podcast, you're part of the worldwide deep psychology community of tens of thousands of people undertaking profound personal transformation. You can join us on any of the major podcasting platforms, and make sure to visit the site deep-psychology.com for lots of high quality resources. Let's get started. This is postmodern Gnostic spirituality. What do I mean by postmodern? Well, first of all, we have to remember that in terms of stages of faith development, we have, and these aren't all of them, but these are the ones that immediately precede the level that I'm talking about. We have mythic, we have rational, and we have postmodern, and we have postmodern, which actually might be several stages, and in fact there's models that describe postmodern as several stages. But basically, if we compare it, I've talked about mythic and rational faith. If we compare postmodern to postmodern, what happens in postmodern spirituality is often we realize that other faith traditions might be important and they might point to certain deep spiritual truths, and we start sort of opening up to them. You know, we might become interested in Buddhism or yoga or meditation or Hinduism, and our mind opens in that sense, and we're now starting to grasp things on a deeper level. We're starting to realize that spirituality is actually a transformative thing. We now sort of look beyond symbols being either a lot of rubbish, which tends to be rational and interpretation, or as like a literal truth, which would be a more mythic interpretation. We become open to symbols as being more of what I've talked about here and what I'm going to talk about later on, this level of symbolic understanding, and so on. However, postmodern, I've found, often we're still not quite getting the depth of what this is, of what spirituality really is. That's kind of what I find. I find that a lot of times postmodern spirituality, it's more about kind of feeling good and about like coming together in groups and about, you know, exploring health and exploring this practice and that other practice and singing and chanting and all this. And it lacks sort of a clear direction, a very sort of clear structure and a clear reason for doing it, I find. With postmodern, our attention is on direct experience. We're going to talk about this in a minute. It's on direct experience. It's on what I would call Gnostic spirituality. We're not so much interested maybe in getting together with our people and doing spirituality that way. We have our focus, we have a very clear focus, and it is on direct experience, and it is on awakening beyond, you know, sort of mythic ideas of awakening, beyond rational ideas of awakening, beyond even postmodern ideas of awakening. This goes right to the heart of the issue. And now, instead of just looking at different traditions and being sort of open to them, we now start to realize that, oh my goodness, they all kind of point to the same thing in different ways. You know, the deeper truths are enclosed in the spiritual traditions are all, I don't want to say they're the same in kind of like a false sort of way of equating them all together, but they are pointing to the same levels of human consciousness. Essentially, that's what they're pointing to. And so we're looking at the deep truths in all spiritual traditions, in this case, Christianity, and we're looking at the symbols that point to those deep truths as a real indicator for what those truths might be and how they induce us into a direct experience of them. We now judge things by their utility. So rather than judging them on, is it Christian, is it Hindu, is it Buddhist, is it this, that, or the other thing, is it this teacher or that teacher, I think it's very sort of non-dogmatic in that sense. It's not based on where does the teaching come from necessarily. It's not based on who is giving the teaching, only to the extent that the teaching is useful to us as spiritual practitioners, and to our own direct experience of spirituality. I think that's what happens at postmodern. This could be a whole other talk, but I just want to say that this view that I'm proposing here of Christianity is really a postmodern thing, and I've explained a little bit why. Another key point here is that this is based on direct experience. If you've never had direct experience of the things that I'm talking about here, it's really difficult to understand why like Christ and the Bible and Christianity is really all about direct experience. It's about direct spiritual awakening. It's about deeply perceiving for yourself in your own direct experience the reality of what they're trying to point you to. It's difficult for me to describe it. So if you've never had those experiences, I just have to say, look, when you have them, you'll understand a lot better what the spiritual traditions are talking about, including Christianity. And that is our focus. It's on direct experience. It's not about believing anything. It's not about memorizing the Bible, and it's not about even taking the pointers and the symbols and the descriptions too seriously, because at the end of the day, you can memorize 100 quotes from Jesus Christ, but if you've never had a direct experience, for me, it's really a waste of time, because Jesus was a Gnostic teacher at the end of the day. When you have direct experience of it, you'll understand that that is the case. And if we're never reaching direct experience of these matters, then really we're either lost in belief or we're lost in just ignorance, really. Of course, we might need to study these things on a more intellectual level at first, but that is, in my opinion, if it never gets translated into direct experience, and if you're never trying to make that the case, then it's really quite irrelevant what you sort of know intellectually. And it's a great, to me, it might sound like a kind of barrier, and I suppose it is in a way. But another way to look at it is like it's a great opportunity, because I'm not asking you to like believe anything I say and just take me on my word and then that's it. You've understood what Christianity is really about and what Easter is really about. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that really counts is your direct experience, and if I don't help you have a direct experience, or if this doesn't, this talk doesn't spur you on to do the work to have a direct experience of these matters, then it's irrelevant. And so it's freeing up, actually. Because direct experience is the standard. And I'm not saying you need to even be a Christian. I'm not saying you need to memorize anything. I'm not saying you need to believe things. I'm saying you need to cultivate your direct experience. You need to have direct perception of these matters, and that's it, and then you understand them. This is based on psychological development that is beyond mythic and rational. So I've explained this before, but I just want to make that very clear to you. that it's not mythic faith, the faith that 99% of people participate in or think that religion is about, or spirituality or whatever. They think it's mythic, and that's what they equate it to. They obviously don't say that, but when they think about religion, they're basically thinking about mythic religion, because that's what dominates, and it's what has dominated for thousands of years. Unfortunately, well, it's probably played a role, but now it's getting to the point where we're sick of it, and we're like, we need something else. It's also not rational, as I've explained, and the importance of the fact that it's beyond mythic and rational is that we are actually looking at things from a higher point of view. We're not going down into mythic and rational and getting caught up in trying to fix the mythic and rational worldview. Obviously, I'm going to critique them a lot, and I have already, but that is not my ultimate goal here. The point I'm trying to make is that we're actually operating on a higher level when we look at Easter from this point of view, when we look at Christianity from this point of view. And so, on one hand, it's more correct because post-rationality looks at things, it includes rationality in its best version, but also it's seeing things from a higher level that cannot be reduced to rationality. So it's more correct. It doesn't get caught up in the same traps that rationality does. It's inherently more inclusive, and the same applies to the mythic. It's more correct and it's aware of more than the mythic level is. It's more inclusive than both of them because we're not, for one thing, we're not just believing literally in the Bible to the exclusion of all other traditions, and we're not getting lost in literal interpretations, which is very exclusive actually. It's more inclusive than rational because we're not just saying, well, this needs to be demonstrably true according to scientific evidence and this and that and that. When we get lost in that, we're never going to have a direct experience of these matters. And inherently, it's just aware of more. It's aware of the fact that, for example, the deepest spiritual truths cannot really be put into language, and we cannot prove them in any way other than through direct experience. And mythic and rational do not allow for either of those things, really, fundamentally speaking. Just keep that in mind. If you're having a doubt, trying to understand where is this fitting in. It's beyond mythic and rational, and I've explained what those are. It's beyond both of them. And that's why some of these things might seem a bit sort of out there and a bit kind of, or even a bit sort of regressive. And I'm not saying that the way I interpret and the way I explain it doesn't fall into more primitive ways of thinking about these things, but fundamentally I think the way I'm interpreting and viewing this and presenting this is beyond mythic and rational, and you have to try and understand it from that level, that you cannot look at them from a mythic or anti-mythic or rational or purely anti-rational. It's actually beyond both, and it includes them to the extent that they need to be included. And finally, just to sort of build this up, that these truths become self-evident when you reach into post-conceptual, symbolic, and metaphoric spirituality. So again, if you're trying to understand these things from a point of view that is purely conceptual, it is purely sort of literal, you're not going to understand them because this is post-conceptual, it is symbolic and it is metaphorical. And if you're trying to meet this at a level that is lower than that, it's not going to work because we're aiming high here. We're really trying to ask, at the highest possible level that I can understand at the moment, what is this really about? And so this is actually, it's actually a level of faith development, of psychological development that is beyond what a lot of people are able to access. And so That's why it can be challenging, and that's why a lot of people will not be open to this. And that's why, like, if you try and share this with people, they're probably not going to listen to you because they just do not have. They're either probably lost in mythic spirituality or they're lost in rational spirituality, and neither of those can fully handle post-conceptual, symbolic and metaphoric sort of ways of relating to truth. They can't really handle it. It's not really within their ken. So it's really important to keep that in mind as we go on here. Alright, just before we talk about what Easter is from the highest level, I'm just going to talk very carefully about what the metaphorical symbolic view is. And this is what we're talking about. It's post-mythic, post-rational, post-conceptual, it's symbolic, it's metaphorical. But what does that really mean? In sort of the on the ground, what does it feel like to hold this view of spirituality? And by the way, if you know about James Fowler's Stages of Faith, I've got an article about that on my website if you want to check that out. Search Stages of Faith and you'll find it. This is sort of Fowler Stage 5, Stage 6 faith. And here we're just going to look at a few of the most essential points in terms of like on the ground, what does this look like? Well, the first thing that I think is that we are ignoring historical fact and we're also ignoring dogma. So I'm not, as I've said before, I'm not here to debate the biblical facts or non-facts, or I'm not here to debate whether like Jesus' miracles actually took place, whether he literally came out of a cave on the the day of the resurrection, or whether the Last Supper was literally the day before he was crucified, whether he was actually literally crucified, whether Jesus even existed. I've got my opinion on those, but it doesn't even matter. Like we're not even going into that. Like we're just not really paying attention to that because it's not important. We're also ignoring dogma. You know, we're not really interested in all the fine minutiae of the Bible. Who did this and when did it take place, and what were the precise details, what was the order of things, who said this and who said that, and what chapter of the Bible was it. I honestly don't really care in a certain way. Like, it's so easy to get messed up in that stuff. And I think is what Christianity has been for thousands of years now. It's just getting lost in all these details and taking everything so literally. And in the metaphoric, symbolic view of spirituality, it actually doesn't matter because, well, we're going to talk about why it doesn't matter. But just take it, for now, just understand that it doesn't really matter. And when I draw on the Bible, for example, when I draw on the facts of Jesus' life, the facts, whether they're facts or not, the point is not to take them as facts or to take them as dogma, or even to put a lot of stock in whether they existed or not. Their only importance is as symbolic. It's a symbolic function. It's a metaphorical function. If I believe something has a metaphorical, symbolic function, I will use it and I'll refer to it. If it doesn't, I'll just ignore it because it just doesn't matter. It doesn't play a role, in my opinion. So we're basically ignoring historical fact and dogma, and we're judging things on their utility. Second of all, we are paying very close attention to symbols here. All the common symbols of the Bible. And how are we doing this? I want this to be very clear how we're actually doing this, right? So the way we're looking at symbols here is that they are pointing to transpersonal realities. The cross is pointing to a transpersonal reality. The crucifixion is pointing to a transpersonal reality. The resurrection is pointing to a transpersonal reality. Lent is pointing to a transpersonal reality. Um, Easter eggs are pointing to a transpersonal reality. I know it might sound funny, but they are, if you look at them from a certain point of view, from the metaphorical symbolic view. So the symbol, let's take the cross, let's take Easter eggs for example, because I wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago, if you want to look at that, and it's fresh in my mind. So an egg, we have an egg. So obviously the egg itself is like a recognizable physical form. You know, we all know what an egg is. We all know that if an egg grows and is nurtured for enough time, you eventually get a chick. We know it contains. We know what it feels like. We know that it is a whole shape. It's a whole object. So it's got this recognizable physical form to it. That's what all symbols have. They all have this recognizable physical form that is, in a lot of ways, it's quite mundane. Like even the cross, it's quite a mundane symbol. It's just that. It's just two lines or two shapes crossing each other, two rectangles crossing each other. The actual physical form can be quite mundane. You know, an egg is an egg. You know, there's nothing particularly special about it. It's not like a piece of gold, for example. It's not really that valuable in and of itself. It's just an egg. However, what we are saying is that the recognizable physical form points to something transpersonal. And it might sound silly to say that, you know, how could an egg be transpersonal? But when you put it in the context of the story of Jesus and the story of Easter, it actually, in the story of the resurrection, it becomes quite obvious that the egg has this transpersonal, it is pointing to a transpersonal reality. The other point is that symbols are like a catalyst or an inductor. What do I mean by this? So what I mean by this is, from the metaphorical symbolic view, when you see spirituality, when you see life from this point of view, what you realize is that the function of symbols is to basically reach down and grab you. It's like they're trying to grab you, they're trying to show you something. And when you're able to tap into what they're trying to show you, your consciousness expands and it opens, and you notice this sort of connection to the reality that they're trying to show you. So as Ken Wilber says, quote, all of those symbols, he's talking about Christian symbols here, by the way, quote, all of those symbols and the rites and ceremonies associated with those symbols are esoterically meant to function as supports of contemplation or symbolic transformers, end quote. So when we're talking about any Easter symbol, we're trying to see them in this way. We're trying to see them as kind of an invitation, as a catalyst, as an inductor. And that's very much how I see them. When I see one of these symbols, that's really what it feels like to me. It's sort of like a wake up. It's like, boom, there you go. Wake up, see this reality that I'm trying to point to. And the reality, it requires some abstraction and some sort of rational thinking a little bit to understand what the symbol is talking about. But fundamentally, this mode of interpreting the symbol is post-rational, because the function of the rationality is not to like put it in some sort of logical, historical context and to connect it up with all the other symbols in the story. It's actually to see the symbol and understand, right, okay, it's a cross, right? It's got a vertical part, it's got a horizontal part. But then when you're actually looking at it, it's a post-rational way of interpreting it, because it's showing you something that is post-verbal. It cannot be put succinctly and easily into words. But when you connect with the power of the symbol, it takes you and it moves you into that transpersonal reality. And so we do require some abstraction and a little bit of understanding. And without the ability to rationalize, I don't think you're going to really connect with symbols in this deep way. Remember, this is post-rational, not pre-rational. Pre-rational tends to be very magically and mythically orientated. It can't really understand symbolic, metaphorical understanding. But it's post-rational, so it includes rationality, but it goes beyond it. How else does this work? Basically, it's essential here to neither believe in myths, the biblical myths, the Christian myths, but also not to demonize them. Because if you spend your time either believing the Easter story absolutely literally, that every single tiny piece of information in the Bible about the Easter story is true, you're not going to understand the metaphorical symbolic view, which, as I said, it doesn't really pay attention to all the fine details, but the most powerful symbols in there. However, if you also spend your time demonizing, the entire Easter story, the whole of Christianity, which is what scientific rational people tend to do, you're closing yourself to the metaphorical symbolic view, because it includes both of those perspectives, but it doesn't get lost in either one. The symbols and the stories and the whole narrative of the Easter story is just a pointer. That's all it is. I'm sure you've heard the metaphor of the finger and the moon. If I point to the moon, it's not so that you look at my finger, it's so that you look at the moon. We're looking at the moon, that's what we're trying to look at. So the Easter story and the whole of Christianity really is just a finger, it's just a pointer, it's just, hey, this is what I'm trying to show you something, so have a look at what I'm trying to point you at, not the actual pointer itself. So believing in the myths is believing in the finger and the like, oh, well, it's a finger, and oh, it's an index finger, and oh, it's got a nail, and it doesn't matter, it's just a pointer. But also, we're not demonizing the pointer. If we demonize the pointer too much, we're not going to see the moon itself. So the symbols function as a way for you to see the heart of the matter, which is really about direct experience. Final couple of points before we talk about what Easter actually is on a transpersonal, metaphorical, symbolic level, is that very simply, it's about you, and it's about right now. So even though everything I'm talking about here might sound very sort of abstract, and we're talking about metaphors and symbols and blah, 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 what are we actually talking about here? Well, listen, this is a good thing to remember. We're talking about you, we're talking about your direct experience, and we're talking about right now. We're not talking about some experience you might have in the future. We're talking about this very experience, the experience of being alive. And we're talking about, without going into too much detail, we're talking about the different levels of our consciousness, and we're talking about what happens when we realize the deeper levels of our consciousness. Usually, our consciousness is locked into basically what I call the surface levels. And the levels that are beyond that, we're pretty much unaware of them. Most people spend their entire lives unaware of them. But they are here right now. It's a matter of training yourself to see it. But you can also, the thing is that they are already here right now. They are available to you. It's a matter of seeing them. And whenever we're engaged in metaphorical symbolic work, we're trying to realize it right now. It's right here, right now. That's where our direct experience of life is. It's right here, right now, and it's within us. It's not somewhere else. We're not talking about somewhere else. We're talking about our very experience right now. And it's very important to realize that. And if we're looking elsewhere, if we're looking outside of ourselves, if we're trying to look outside of ourselves, or if we're trying to look in the past or in the future for this stuff, for the moon, for what all of this is really pointing to, we're not getting it. We're not getting that it's right here, it's direct, it's perceptible, it's waiting for us right now. That is the fundamental, it's such a fundamental thing to remember about all spiritual work, but especially when we're talking about Christianity and Easter. It's talking about right here, right now, and it's talking about you. And finally, to stomach what I'm about to tell you right now, if you don't take this next point on and you don't understand this, you're not going to be able to stomach what the highest meaning of Easter is. You have to realize that spiritual transformation is possible. And it's not possible for Jesus Christ, it's not possible for your favorite saint, and it's not possible as an idea. It is actually possible, because this is what Easter is really about. This is what Christianity is really about. It's really about spiritual transformation. So if you cannot stomach that idea that it's possible and it's about you, it's about your own spiritual transformation, you're not going to understand what we're talking about here. And you're going to continue to think that it's about somewhere else or someone else or whatever. It's about your own spiritual transformation. And that is a nice bridge into this next part, when we're actually going to talk about what Easter really is from this metaphorical, symbolic view. So, to briefly summarise, before we talk about sort of the various aspects of Easter and what they really mean, Easter is a metaphor for the path of spiritual awakening and spiritual potential. Easter is symbolic. Some of it might be fact, but whether it is or not is irrelevant. Easter is really a symbolic story. It is like it's a story we tell as a pointer to something else, basically. Easter is a collection of symbols pointing to various aspects of the path of spiritual awakening. Easter is not limited to calendar time, Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter Sunday and all this. It's not limited to calendar time. It can happen at any time, because this is our spiritual nature. It's talking about our spiritual nature, which is already present if you have the eyes to see it. It can happen at any time. It doesn't have to happen on a Sunday. And it is beyond time. Fundamentally, our spiritual nature is beyond our usual notions of time. So we're not getting locked up in, the Easter weekend or whatever. Easter is beyond the Bible. It's beyond Christianity. It's beyond dogma. It's beyond it's beyond the church. It's beyond any spiritual tradition. It's beyond anything. It is pointing to a deep aspect of being human. It's nothing to do with the church, really. It's nothing even to do with Jesus Christ, fundamentally speaking. It is a reality of being human. It is talking about the reality of spiritual awakening. We cannot limit that to a certain spiritual tradition, or even a certain symbol, a certain pointer, or a certain story, or a certain set of stories. Easter is a description of spiritual death and rebirth. So I'm saying it's a metaphor for the path of spiritual awakening, and it's a metaphor for spiritual awakening and our highest nature and so on. But to be more precise about it, it is a description of spiritual death and rebirth, right? So that's where the crucifixion and the resurrection come in, and Lent is part of that as well. It's a description specifically of spiritual death and rebirth, not actual your physical death when you're old or whatever, or even Jesus's death. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about spiritual death and rebirth that is beyond age, it's beyond place and time, it's beyond calendar time. It is a fundamental human reality, right? It's metaphorical, it's symbolic. Easter is, we can think of it as like a watershed moment in the person's life. So if you speak about like your own Easter, you might have many Easters, right? But it's a moment, it's a period of spiritual death and rebirth. So your own Easter might be a specific time in your life where you had a deep spiritual death and rebirth. And In that sense, the Easter story is a metaphor for what that is and what the effect of it is and what leads up to it and so on, and what the what is the like the crossover point and what is left behind. That is what Easter is talking about. So when you think of it, we can think of it in this sort of abstract way. It's talking about sort of the general process of that happening. But you can also think about it in your own life. When have you experienced that? And that, in that sense, you could call that an Easter. It's like a watershed moment in your life, in your spiritual path. So in that sense, Easter can be both a single period of time in your spiritual path, in your own personal spiritual path, and it can be like a repeating theme. Because really, if you're a serious spiritual practitioner, you're going through spiritual death and rebirth all the time. Some might be smaller, some might be bigger, some might be quite subtle, maybe even not really realize they're happening. Some might be like giant moments where your life changes quite dramatically. So that's what Easter really is. The whole Easter story is just a metaphor for spiritual death and rebirth. That's really what it is. So now let's go into the actual, like the days and the popular symbology that we're all familiar with, and talk about what it really means in terms of spiritual death and rebirth. And to sum this up, I'm going to quote Ken Wilber when he talks about this, his own summary of this. Wilber says, quote, "Christ is sacrificed, the Lamb. He dies to his separate self, the crucifixion, is reborn to ascend into heaven, actual transcendence," end quote. So that talks a little bit about what the crucifixion and the resurrection means. Let's talk about Lent, and then we'll come back to what I just said there. So the sort of story of Lent, as we all know, is that Jesus basically spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert where he was tempted by the devil. So what does that symbolize in terms of spiritual death and rebirth? What this symbolizes to me is that basically prior to any form of spiritual awakening, there is usually like a period of a lot of hard work, a lot of striving and confusion, and where basically you're wrestling with your old way of seeing the world. You're wrestling with the devil. The devil is not some abstract entity outside of you. It is your ignorance of your spiritual nature. That's all it is. So whenever you're like pre-spiritual awakening, you're wrestling with your addiction to your personality and your addiction to yourself and your ignorance of who you really are. That's basically that's what's happening, and that is your period of Lent. And an interesting thing about Lent is that if we sort of look at a more literal sort of interpretation of it, Lent is sort of a period of renunciation, right? And the theme of renunciation appears in all spiritual schools, and it is seen as a necessary aspect of awakening. So in that sense, we could say that Lent is like something you may choose to do deliberately as a way to awaken, but it's also something you're just going to have to go through before spiritual awakening, because fundamentally you are wrestling, you're tempted by your ignorance, by your addiction to yourself, by your lack of knowledge of your own spiritual nature. That's what it is. It's pre-awakening. Good Friday, the crucifixion. This is not a day of death. This is not the day that Jesus Christ died, like 2,000 years ago. This is spiritual death. It is the death of your ignorance. It is the death of egoic consciousness. It's not your physical death. It's not. You're not dying for your sins. You're not. Jesus didn't die for our sins on the cross. it is symbolizing what we need to do to spiritual awaken, which is to die to our identity, die to our obsessive identity and our exclusive identity with the human condition and with our psychology, with our sense of identity, with our sense of who we are. That's what the crucifixion is. And the cross itself is a very powerful symbol, not really for death itself, but for our spiritual nature. And I've talked about this in another video. Look on my channel, it wasn't so long ago that I filmed that. The cross is a pointer to our spiritual nature. It's a pointer to what it's like to live as a human aware of our spiritual nature. That's all I'll say. So the crucifixion is a metaphor for spiritual death, for our spiritual, for like the cutting of our ignorance, the cutting of our attachment to who we are, right? And this is where the resurrection comes in. And as you might have guessed already, the resurrection is just a metaphor for spiritual rebirth. And there's a phrase in Matthew, the chapter of the Bible called Matthew, that I really like, which is, his appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. And in Thessalonians, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. So the resurrection is not about Jesus being reborn as like an actual person that was reborn out of a cave. No, it's not even about you being reborn like from a physical death. It's about our rebirth, our spiritual rebirth as Christ-like beings. Our clothes are as white as snow. Our appearance is like lightning. There's actually like a noticeable transformation that is taking place. Not that we have to wear white clothes. This is all metaphorical. We're not literally like lightning. There's an energetic change in us. There's like a change to our personality. There's a change to how we are in the world. There's a change to how we live. There's a certain gaining of purity that we undergo when we are reborn spiritually. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. We die to our ignorance of who we are. We die to our ignorance of the human condition, to our spiritual nature, and we realize that we are not really human, fundamentally. And so in that sense, we can never die, because our spiritual nature is fundamentally immortal. Our Christ nature, our own inner Jesus Christ, is immortal. And when it says believes in me, it doesn't mean believes in me, at least when we're talking metaphorical, symbolic point of view. It doesn't mean believe in me and all my dogma. It means follow the way of Jesus, follow the way of spiritual death and rebirth, which is about direct experience and about actual transformation, not about believing myths and nonsense. It's about your own rebirth. When you die spiritually, when you go through spiritual death and you go through spiritual rebirth, what is the result of that? Right? And it is, Jesus himself is an archetype for your spiritual self when you are reborn. It's an archetype for who you can become when you are spiritually reborn. And yes, it's just an archetype, the archetype of purity, the archetype of giving, the archetype of being available, the archetype of being wise, the archetype of purity. These are guiding principles for who we can become. It doesn't mean that all people who have gone through spiritual death and rebirth to some degree are going to all the time have these qualities, but overall, this tends to happen. This is the general result of of spiritual awakening, is a transformation of who you are. And that is what Easter Sunday is pointing to. Nothing more, nothing less. So that is the Easter story in a nutshell. It's all just metaphor. It's all just pointers to this process of spiritual death and rebirth. And this is where you can be Christian without being Christian. I don't really consider myself a Christian. I'm not even christened. I don't really know. I've not really read much of the Bible, but I can see the symbols and I can see the symbology, and I realise it's pointing to something very deep when interpreted from a metaphorical, symbolic view. And to me, this is where the power of it is. So whenever you're engaging with Easter, whenever you're reading about it, whenever you're reading about the life of Jesus, whenever you're reading about Christianity in general, look at it from this metaphorical, symbolic view, and look at it all of it, everything. Obviously, you can discard stuff that isn't useful. There's a lot of stuff that I don't find useful in the Bible whatsoever to this end. But ultimately, the most useful stuff is all about spiritual awakening. It's all about your spiritual awakening. It's not about Christ's own transformation. Christ is just a metaphor for you as well. And Jesus Christ is just an archetype or a metaphor for who we become when we go through this process. All right, everyone. I think I'm going to end it there. I will have an accompanying article on this, and I've also got other articles on Easter. You might want to go to my website, go to articles, spirituality, Christianity, and you'll find articles which is basically interpreting Christianity from how I see it, which is from a metaphorical, symbolic perspective, if you resonated with this. And please remember to subscribe, support me on Patreon if you find this valuable. And also, if you like, I do coaching. So if you want coaching on any of the things that I talk about in my podcast, please get in touch with me, ross@deep-psychology.com. Thanks very much for joining me for this talk. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please leave a review. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at ross@deep-psychology.com. If you'd like to go deeper, head to deep-psychology.com for articles, courses, ebooks, and one-to-one coaching. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.